Hi, I'm Matt Williams. Welcome to Glimpses. My guest today is an award-winning commercial photographer. His photography transcends portrait photography because he has this unique ability of capturing the essence, the soul of his subjects. And we're going to talk about that. And if you're interested in seeing some of his images, you can go online and look up Tom Kubik, especially human beings. Look at that site, and you'll see what I mean about his work. Tom, welcome to Glimpses.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You have a unique worldview, and it is obvious when you're taking pictures. Now, but before we get into that, you had quite a serpentine journey getting to where you are today.
Yeah.
And I want to go all the way back to Youngstown, Ohio, where you were born, and then take us through that journey because it's a unique journey.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And it's still winding. I really don't know when it's going to straighten out.
Right.
So, yeah, Youngstown, Ohio. I mean, one of the things that I connected with you the most about was this Midwest roots where these places that they have spotty reputation. And Youngstown is definitely one of those places. It's now, who knows what phase it's in now. I mean, there's a whole new thing now, like post-Trump era, that the politics of the whole region is shifting, and who knows which way it's going to go now. But when I was growing up, it was heavily mafia run. And,
Okay. All right.
In fact,
you grew up in the Sopranos neighborhood.
Yeah. Okay. In fact, your wife told me, I didn't realize this, that she said, "Oh, my family went through Youngstown," and in fact, most Italians who came to America put down Youngstown as the place where they're going.
Yes. And then from there, they moved to other cities,
right.
Detroit, where my wife's from. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it kind of all made sense to me all of a sudden why I had such a strong sense of taste around red sauce when I was growing up. I didn't even realize until I'd moved on. But, I grew up with a single mom there. And once she remarried when I was 11, we moved out to California, and I was living in the Bay Area. That's when I got my first taste of, oh, this is a bigger world than I thought.
So from Youngstown to the Bay Area.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and then from there, I moved to Northern Virginia for high school. And after getting in a ton of trouble in middle school, I was a real, I was in trouble.
Okay. All right.
My older brother was he and I we got in some trouble, and so when I moved to Northern Virginia, my stepdad had suggested, "Hey, why don't you join ROTC and see what that's like?" And I thought that was the nerdiest thing in the world. I had avoided Boy Scouts for my whole life. I didn't want anything to do with that. But jumping into ROTC, I said, "All right, fine, I'll give it a shot." And it turned out that kind of discipline was something that my soul was yearning. And I latched onto it, and I went full bore into it. So having that experience, I realized, oh, I want to be in the military. This is, all of a sudden I have this fire to do something bigger than myself.
But you also have structure and order and purpose. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. In a world where, often I was on my own growing up when my mom, she worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs. And, I was with the babysitter or with the neighbor, or it was when I was old enough, it was just me and my brothers. So having that structure and the clear, decisive, okay, this is what you're doing now, this is what you're doing now. It felt so good to feel like, oh, okay, it's sort of containing this wild energy that I had growing up.
And you went in from the ROTC. You did go into the military.
Right.
Which branch?
The Air Force.
And when you were in the Air Force, you traveled, around the world. And that also, I'm talking about your worldview perspective, because I just find you have such a unique take. So you moved to Bay Area, high school trouble, ROTC. Now you're in the Air Force. Where did you tour, and where were you stationed when you were in the Air Force?
Right. So one thing I tell people is don't follow me on timing.
Okay.
I joined the Air Force in April of 2001. So,
What?
right. So,
Okay.
and I also bought a house in 2006. So don't follow me on timing.
Okay.
Wait about a year until after I make a decision to see where you want to go.
Okay.
But so I joined what I thought I was joining was sort of a Clinton era administration. It was more of a global peacekeeping kind of situation, and
Right.
I walked into the biggest war in U.S. history. So when I arrived at my first duty station, I was just getting settled in when I saw the second plane hit the tower on
Oh
my
my
way
gosh.
to my training, and I thought to myself, oh wow, okay, this is I can like even feel the silence in the room right now.
Yeah.
And, um, knowing that I walked into this, and so I walked right to my supervisor and I said, "What can I do? Send me there. Help me. Like let me go and help pick up the rubble and pull people out of there. I just
Right.
want to do something." And they said, "We've spent too much money training you to send you to New York to do that, but what we'll do is deploy you." So my first time out of the country ever was going to Kuwait, and
Wow.
yeah, I thought they had a chartered airline that we got on, and we were wearing civilian clothes and all of that, and so it didn't really hit me until we actually landed on the runway in Kuwait,
Wow.
and it's the middle of June, it's like 115 degrees, and I step out of the plane, and there's the first guy that greets me is wearing Kevlar, and he's got an M16, and he says, "Welcome to Kuwait," and in my head I was like, "What the hell did I do?"
Wow.
What did I do? Um, but what was really surprising about that to me was my duty was to escort these people who were helping to rebuild the base. And these people were what uh, naively were called third country nationals, people who are hired from the surrounding area, like Egypt, Pakistan, in this case, Bangladesh, to do simple construction jobs. Now, a lot of these people had actual like quite a bit of education in the country where
Right.
they're from, but they couldn't get work there. So they're coming here to feed their families, send money home. And I was told in my security briefing, as soon as I landed, we get on a bus, we go to the security briefing, they say, "You can't trust these people. Every single one of them, they're here to steal information. They're here to hurt us at any chance they get." What I found was really heart open people who wanted to connect with me. And when they would sit down in a circle and have lunch together and they're all sharing food, and I'm like, "Oh, that looks great. Here I am sitting in my truck eating this chow hall food. I'd rather go sit with them."
Right.
So I go and sit in the circle and I'm passing my food around and they're passing me naan bread and these homemade curries, and I'm passing my cheeseburger and french fries around, and we're all sharing the food. And I thought, "Oh, this is not what I've been told. There's this disparity here and it's worth examining deeper." So I befriended a couple of the guys, and soon enough they were taking me downtown to these Indian restaurants that were buried in the nooks and crannies of the city, and we're holding hands because culturally in India you hold hands with men who you're friends with, and
Okay.
they had shared that with me, and I'm holding this guy's hand and I'm like, this is something I would never do in
Look
the
at that
US,
perspective.
but
Yeah.
here I am, and I just felt so wide open.
But I think that that's a good example, and you're a good example of likes attract. You
Mm,
said they were open-hearted, you're open-hearted.
mm,
So you didn't go in with this barricade and this defensive mechanism in place. You
mhm,
were open-hearted. So you went through the military. I want to get to when you were in Vegas. You
yeah,
were a poker dealer in Vegas.
yeah, yeah.
And how long did you do that?
Wow. Yeah. So I did that for 3 years
Uh,
as my job. It was
okay.
it was my exit job from the military. It was sort of like a really great place for me to jump into and figure out what is my next move as I jump back into higher education. So that's something I did not do well at straight out of high school.
Right.
I was way more interested in women, and my mind was furious with liberation. So,
Okay.
um, so jumping back into higher education, as I decided what I was going to land on in my career, dealing poker was, it seems very random, but to me it was an obvious fit. I loved playing poker. I was doing very well at
Right.
it. So why not get behind the scenes there and check it out? And with my military work ethic, it was very easy for me to get a job. I jumped right in at the Venetian, which is one of the most
Sure.
coveted casinos, and then went on to deal the World Series of Poker.
You did?
I did, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Hmm.
I did all this research. I didn't know that. I didn't find that on.
Yeah, they don't publish our name. It's very secret. No,
Well,
but
here's what I want to talk about because look, you military, going overseas, dealing poker, I really believe, and tell me if I'm wrong, all this, your perspective changed and you really learned how to read people. You learned how to see beyond the obvious and look at their soul.
right.
And that's what you capture in your photography. That's why I was so intrigued with this journey. And here's a quote that I pulled from a previous interview you did. I use my perception of people's emotional states combined with technical know-how from a college degree to relate and then create photos that help the viewer feel a real piece of the subject. And you do that. And then it struck me in Buddhism teaches that there is a spark inside each person that represents that person's true nature, the Buddha nature or the original mind. And as I was thinking about that, I thought that's what you do with your photography. That is really what you do. I mean, they're pretty pictures and you make people look nice, but you capture that ineffable element. How do you do that? Can you explain that? Is that just, you've done it for so long, is it intuitive?
It's pretty hard to put words to because,
I'm sure.
Listening to some of your other Glimpses episodes, we talk about this creative spark and how the channel and channeling it through. And
the spiritual element of creativity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And if you listen to Elizabeth Cuthbert's TED Talk, she talks about how prior to the Renaissance period, nobody actually signed their artwork. And you talked about how the word genius comes from this little thing that used to sit on your shoulder and whisper in your ear, right? And so it's almost like it doesn't belong to me.
Right.
But in a way, spirituality and artistry are completely inseparable to me. One is the other and vice versa. And as I explore deeper into myself, that comes through in my photography. And as an example, when I first started shooting, I was living in Las Vegas. I was a poker dealer, and I would go out on the street with my camera, just kind of doing street photography. But I was very shy. I would go into places where I felt a little nervous to be in. And actually, I was just listening to Father. Do you know Father Greg Boyle? Do you know his work?
No, I don't.
Amazing guy. He's
Okay.
he's Christian mystic. He started Homeboy Industries just over on the other side of town.
Okay.
And he sits with gang members and folks who wanted to be not gang members, and he just loves the hell out of them until they realize how loved they are and they sort of start to come out of it. Anyway, he has this concept of oh man, I'm blank.
That's right. Obviously pulling something out or tapping into people. And
so the name of the concept is not really that important actually, but what he's doing is he's going to the fringes and he's saying, not how can I affect the fringe, but how can the fringe affect me? And so by doing that, this is sort of what I'm doing in my photography is I'm not showing up in how can I affect this person, I'm showing up in how can they affect me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
the reason I know this, you took photos for me for social media, right? And the thing I noticed about your work is you don't fuss and you don't worry about lens and light. You just kind of grab moments. You see something, a glimpse, you glimpse something and you shoot it. And there's no fuss and bother and you're not hanging a lot of lights. And I go, what is that? It's got to be some kind of just little nudge or instinct to go, that's the moment, that's the moment, that's the moment,
Yes.
right?
Yes, that is it. And it's being in touch with myself is first and foremost. Being in touch with spirit,
right?
Maybe is first and foremost, actually. Being in touch with myself would be second.
Right.
And then from there, I can sort of register back and forth with my subject, with you in this case. And I'm feeling into you. Where are you at right now? Okay, where am I at? And there's a place where we meet.
Wow.
And then that's the moment when it's like, oh, that's it. That's it. There's this relationship where it's almost like if you're those Tesla balls where you have the electricity that's coming off that center coil and you bring your hand in and when you touch the ball, it meets your finger, right? And all the concentration goes right to where you're touching the ball, right? It's kind of like that moment right there. Boom. It happens. And that's when I know.
I pulled another quote and I'm not going to quote you all day. This is the last one. You said, becoming an artist is nothing less than a transformative spiritual experience. And I think you just explained that. And it's interesting you talk about that what happens between, because yesterday I was talking with Richard Karn, who was an actor on Home Improvement. We were talking about when two people are doing a scene and the cameras are rolling, there's your energy, my energy, your dialogue, mine. But there's something happening right here that the camera records. And you can call that energy, you can call it aura, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But it is something that's alive, and the camera catches that. And that's what you do with all your photography.
It's like a specter. It's what I facilitate men's groups as well, and I have a weekly men's group, and we call that the third body.
The third body.
Right. It's something that exists because of me and because of you, but it's not either one of us.
Got it.
It can only exist between us.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is a perfect segue. In looking at your work and thinking of other photographers, I'm reading a book about Edward Curtis, the Timothy Egan book about him. He shot all the indigenous shots. He was trying to preserve a vanishing culture, and he shot a lot of it. But Native Americans and other cultures around the world believe that the camera actually captures the soul. And some people, like Crazy Horse, would not ever allow himself to be photographed ever. He didn't want them stealing his soul. And he even had it declared that even in his death, when he was dead, they couldn't take his photograph. So what you just described, the third person, is that soul and so the camera is capturing your soul in some ways, right?
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to get too woo-woo here, but it does capture the soul.
Yes. It's funny that they also, some tribes had something that they called a coup stick, which it's a coup stick, not acoustic, but coup stick.
Uh-huh.
And so if they touched you with the coup stick, it would steal your soul as well.
Interesting.
And what's interesting is before I even got into photography, when people, I don't know, I have this weird esoteric wisdom. I think it's like, or knowledge rather, not wisdom, but it's probably has to do with ADHD. But anyway, I knew what acoustic was when I was in high school. And people, if they had a hard time pronouncing my last name, I would say it's like acoustic.
But it's Kubik.
But it's Kubik. And people didn't know what acoustic was, so it wasn't very helpful. But there is actually this, I feel a little something, in there. And especially in the beginning, and I think that's why I felt so cautious when I was doing street photography. And I was like, oh, this feels like, but, and Father Greg Boyle goes into this as well. It's like when you're showing up there in your heart and receptive to receiving,
right?
You're not stealing anything. It's permission. And what I'm working towards a lot of the times when I'm working with my subjects is permission. And it's not spoken. It's never asked for in that way. But there's an energetic permission that happens. And that's actually likely where I've never thought about this or examined it in this way, but it's likely where those 2 points meet that I was talking about.
Do you feel a certain responsibility as a photographer?
Absolutely.
So you do, because you can capture someone and just how you shoot them, not only just the lighting, not just the technical side, but what we've been talking about. You can really present them to the world in an ill light, a good light, right? I mean, there's a responsibility. I hadn't even thought about that till we started talking, that you've got a certain responsibility, and what are you going to put out there?
Art is highly manipulative.
Yes.
The world is highly manipulative,
right?
And people talk about how they don't want to be brainwashed. Well, guess what? We're being brainwashed all the time.
Right.
Right. It's really more about choosing what you want to be brainwashed with. And, so there is a huge responsibility in creating art. We have to take into account what this person shared with me. If we're working with a subject, is what they shared with me something that they're willing to share? Right. And if it is, great. And that's where that permission comes in. Beyond that, an example of that is I worked with a friend of mine in New York who was going through breast cancer, and she had scheduled a double mastectomy. I wrote to her right away. I said, if you ever want to document any part of this journey for yourself, just so you can look back on this in a few years and say, wow, I went through that, then let me know. I would love to help. Mm-hmm. And at some point she said, okay, I'm ready. So she came into the studio. She was at the point where she had the double mastectomy and the reconstruction process had started, but it wasn't complete. Now, she was in her early 40s, an attractive woman, and she saw me as an opportunity to sort of test this out. Like, okay, can I be seen in this place where I'm at and feel empowered and feel beautiful? And it was a process that we danced through. And it's like, hey, at any time, this is the yes is only good for this moment. You can say yes now. Next minute you can say no. You can always say no.
Right.
Let's just see how this unfolds. And we conversed and we talked about her experience and we talked about the struggle and just being witness to her, like, this is really scary for me.
Right.
Like, I bet it is. And at some point she's like, okay, let's do this, and so we start the shoot. And I have this photo that I love of her so much where it's the moment she first reveals the surgery and she puts her hand over her eyes and she's totally embarrassed. And then she peeks through her
Oh gosh.
hands like this. And I snapped that shot.
Oh my gosh.
And it's just such a, it's that kind of permission, that kind of conversation where it's not a taking of the soul. It's like it's a giving of the soul, really, and me receiving it with grace and gentleness and compassion and caring.
But that's where you're making decisions in a nanosecond.
Right.
And you captured that. You captured that. You know what? And that, I think, obviously it comes with experience. And it's also because you're a highly sensitive individual. I mean, you're sensitized to your world. And so you are able to capture those moments like that. I want to talk about, you mentioned a men's group, and I know you work with the men's group, and then I want to talk about death because let's talk about how the men's group has informed your work as a death doula. And for people who don't know, who are listening, what is a death doula and what does that entail? And how do you prepare for something like that?
A death doula, it's not something that's defined with rigid edges.
Right.
Just as a birth doula is not so structured. You can't. It's if you're building a corporation, you're probably not going to have a solid job description for a birth doula or a death doula. Right?
Dot Doula Inc. Come on.
I mean,
Dot Doula. Yeah, Death Doula University. No, it ain't going to happen.
It's probably not going to happen.
Okay.
But there are pioneers in this field. Ram Dass, who's one of my big teachers. Bodhi B, who is living in Hawaii. He has a school called the Doorway into Light. And there are several others who, unfortunately, I can't recall at the moment. But it's really about accompanying and witnessing. And it's not that different than what I do with photography. It's not that, and that's why it's been such a natural progression. And also why I say that there's really no way to separate artistry and spirituality.
Right.
They flow back and forth. So being a death doula means sitting with someone in those moments when they're transitioning, or if their family member is transitioning or a loved one is transitioning, having presence, knowing a little bit about what happens in hospitals. How can I talk to hospital personnel in a way that might get through the initial sort of pre-screening language that they use a lot of times, where people tend to get shut down in hospitals. Not to, hospitals are amazing. They saved my son's life.
Yeah.
Yet sometimes they can, they're dealing with a lot, and they just sometimes have to filter out people. So having somebody there who can kind of cut through the filter and maybe get to a place where you're, that you can feel more supported in your journey. They're also somebody who is in touch spiritually, who can guide spiritually, maybe across many different faiths, perhaps. Lead prayers, sing, hold your hand, give you water, give you food. Let you cry, just be comfortable with that.
Right, and the passing. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I write about in Glimpses my daughter's birth. I was there, obviously, for her birth when Matisse was born, and the energy that filled the room, I was in awe. And I went, it's bigger than me, and I feel a part of it. And then I was there when my grandmother died, and not the moment she took her last breath, but literally a minute or two after she died. And when I walked in the room, I went, I know this feeling. This is the feeling I had when my daughter was born. It's that same energy, and you feel like you're a part of it. And it was sad for her to die, but I started laughing. And in the middle of the room with my grandmother's body lying there, I went, Grandma, I'm so happy for you. I love you so much, because I could feel her in the room, even though this body that was already starting to get cold was there. And I think if you experience death that way, it takes away that horrible trauma of the agony of dying. And like you use the word transition, there is this transition to some other plane, right? And you help facilitate that. My gosh, what a responsibility.
I'm so touched by what you said. I'm just really like open. I felt myself closing up. Like, no, I got to stay open to this because it's so beautiful.
No, it's true. It's true. It was the exact same feeling. And frisson, I think, I'm probably pronouncing wrong, the French word for goosebumps, basically, where you feel something before you can comprehend what it is. You just know, I'm a part of something big here. And life, when is experienced at birth and death, and I'm sure there are those moments too in relationships, that it just transcends and becomes a whole nother level. So
Yeah, my chest is starting to shake. It's so true what you're saying. It's when my son was born, I just kept saying to myself, "It's the same thing. It's the same thing."
do you mind publicly sharing about your son's birth and what happened? Because when you told me the story, I was astounded, and I didn't know if you were comfortable sharing that or not.
Yeah, I can share it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was so fresh when I told you he was only, I think, a month and a half old.
Yeah,
So
he
it's
was 6 weeks old when you told me the story. Now, how old is he right now?
He's 10 and a half months now.
10 and a half months. But please, this is an amazing story.
Yeah, we had my partner Margot. She's a very she would call herself an Earth Mama.
Okay.
She really values holistic treatments and doing things on your own as much as you can.
Right.
We had a home birth planned. We had the tub. We had the doula. This beautiful midwife who's been doing this for 40 years in LA. She's a legend. And we had everything. We had it all planned. We even had the the mindset. Okay, well, if we have to go to the hospital, so be it. Well, her water broke before she went into labor, which is actually quite rare. It only happens about 10% of the time. From that point on, you have about 48 hours before the chance of infection goes through the roof. And then you have to go to a hospital.
Right.
So we did everything we could to try to get this baby pushed out.
Right.
We went on an 8-mile walk one night over the hills of our neighborhood.
Jumping up and down.
Yeah, get out!
Come out.
Nothing. She had a few contractions. After 48 hours, the midwife came to our house. Margot opens the door. She's got this big smile on her face, and my midwife goes, "You're not in labor." And she's like, "But I had some contractions." She's like, no, sweetie, you would not be answering the door with a smile on your face. Trust me, you're not in labor. Time to pack your bags. Let's go to the hospital. The first twist was we had a backup hospital planned. The midwife said, "I don't want you to go to that hospital. If you walk in there, they're going to give you a C-section as soon as you walk through the door. There's another hospital. They have a team of midwives. I really think you should go there." So we change direction once. We go to the hospital. We get checked in. They check her dilation. She's practically not dilated at all. So they said, "All right, we can't, there's a lot of things we can't do at this point, but we can kind of start warming you up." So the first intervention comes. It is a something to speed the process up.
Right.
Right. So that goes on, and then it's working. Contractions are happening. However, we're hooked up to all these monitors, which is another thing that she didn't want. And we're watching the baby's heart rate, and it's dipping down and then going back up. Every time she has a contraction, it's dipping down and going back up. And this is one of those things where, call the nurse. "Hey, nurse, this is happening." I'm freaking out. The nurse is like, "It's normal," walks out of the room. It's like, oh, okay, great. That doesn't feel real good. So it keeps happening all night. Neither one of us sleep. The morning comes around, and Margot says, "Hey, can we check again?" So they check. You're only 1.5 centimeters. Now it takes 10 for those of you who don't know.
Yeah,
It
to
takes
give
10.
birth, and the water's already broken,
Right.
but it ain't happening.
Right.
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 Okay.
And they say, okay, this is really, however, this is really stressful for the baby. Obviously, yes, the heart rate is dropping. We need to do something. So they have to inject more artificial amniotic fluid into the sac to try to relieve some of the pressure from the baby, some of the stress. Thankfully, that worked. So we get through that. And then when they checked her again and she was only 1.5 centimeters, she was like, I can't do this. This has been 48 hours. No, it's been now 70 something hours.
Right.
I'm only 1.5 centimeters after so much work. She completely collapses. This is it. I'm done. And I had to have like a coach in the locker room halftime moment with her where it was one of those moments where just like with my subjects, I'm dropping in, okay, how am I feeling right now? Where is she at? Okay, let's find that space in the middle.
Right.
And I got down on my knees and I looked up at her on the bed and I said, whatever it is that you need to do, you do it. You have gone so far beyond what anyone would expect at this point. You've endured so much. If you want to get a C-section, if you want to get an epidural, because those things were off the table for
Right.
her. Anything you need to do, you deserve it all. And then we had a really good cry, and she's like, okay, I'm going to get a C-section. And we call the midwife and she says, don't get a C-section. Don't do it. Get an epidural first. So she got the epidural and then she's feeling better. It's like all of that energy, that thickness that was in the room just left. Whew, we're good. Okay. I can pull out this book. So silly, the things that we think we're going to need during a birth. I brought this roomy book of poems that I thought we would just sit there and read.
Read
And
poems and the baby would slide out.
All right. She's like hanging on me and moaning, and I'm like moaning too. And, but so I'm like, okay, I can finally read this roomy poem. I pull out, I'm reading a poem. And just as I finished, I close the book. And this photo of me and my grandmother slides out of the book. I don't even remember putting it in there. Slides out of the book. And also, my grandmother passed away 3 years ago.
Okay.
So, here she is. She shows up. Here we are. Like, grandma's in the room. And, that intuition that comes through is 100% from her genes. She's the kind of woman who she would stare you in the eyes when she first met you. And you just knew right away. Not only does she love you, but she also knows everything about you somehow too.
Right.
So having her presence in the room was just such a strength for us, to keep going. So then the contractions are picking up where we progress with Pitocin, which is,
right. Move things along.
Yet sometimes the heartbeat is still going, it's still dropping. And I'm sweating bullets now. Like neither one of us have slept in 2 days.
Right.
This baby is on the edge. And finally, the shift change comes. They check her again. She's 9.5 now. Whoa, just like that. All right, let's start pushing. Let's do this. After 20 minutes, he comes out. And I'm front row for the whole thing. I've got 4 cameras there, 2 film cameras, a digital camera, and my iPhone, recording every moment.
Like a true photographer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but at some point I'm putting them down and I'm like the side, I'm on the coach position again, and I've got my hands on my thighs and I'm staring down the barrel of the birth canal and I'm watching his head come out. And then it hits me. I've never seen a childbirth before, but something about this looks different. And I knew he had some meconium, which is an issue, and they had a team of ICU people there because we knew he was small.
Right.
He kind of stopped growing. Margot had got COVID 30 weeks in, and he kind of stopped growing at that point.
Interesting. That's fascinating.
Yeah. They anticipated he was going to be about 5 pounds. So they had the ICU team there, and everybody's watching this, and I see his head come out and the cord's around his neck. Oh my God. So the midwife whips the cord around, gets it off of his neck. But then I'm like, but still something doesn't look right. And they pull him out the last bit. And as they pulled him out, she was holding him, and his body was just, it was just a bag of bones.
Just limp.
Yeah, he's the color of this gray soundproofing here. Just dark gray. And it's hitting me. It's hitting me now, but it was hitting me in the moment of like, oh, this is not normal.
Right.
His eyes are closed. No breath.
No movement.
No movement. Margot is thrilled that she just pushed this baby through the canal. She's also high as a kite on endorphins and hormones and epidural. And they show her that they do the customary, here's your baby. And then I hear the ICU doctor or the NICU doctor next to me say, cut the cord immediately. They cut the cord and they take him over to the table and they start working on him. And I go over and I'm staring. I'm just 8 inches from his face through this little glass bassinet, and I'm staring at him and going, come on, buddy, come on. You can do this. Land in your body. Land in your body. And then at some point, I can only imagine what crazy things fathers do when their kid is in the situation. So at some point, the NICU nurse looks at me and she's like, hey, you got to go. So I stepped back and I go over to Margot and I put my head on her lap. And she's saying to me, are you okay? Everything is going to be fine. Don't worry. This is totally normal. This is totally normal. And she's rubbing my head. And in my head, I'm like, do I tell her? Do I reveal to her
the baby is limp and gray?
Yeah. Or do I just see what happens? And in that moment, I felt God in the room very strongly. And he's basically telling me he, God,
she, it,
yes,
the divine mind,
the
spirit.
divine mind is telling me, are you going to face this and not run away? Are you going to accept that this might be the only time you have with your son? And it's tense, and my body is building, and my shoulders are coming up, and I want to throw up. And then I just say, okay, if that's all I get, that's all I get. And my body released, and then I hear the nurse say, he's starting to cry.
Oh my gosh.
He's starting to cry. And then you can start to hear the choking, and then there's his voice.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've heard the story before, but it's anyone that hasn't experienced the miracle of birth, and it is a miracle, and that moment when the baby comes out, but what you went through, and it's so fascinating that you felt that spirit, for lack of a better label, in the room, and at that moment you relaxed and the baby, you kind of let go, and the baby arrived.
Yes.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's almost, it's like that. I love the motion you made with your hands there. It's like the release of my body went into his.
Yeah.
At some point they said, get the crash cart. Get the crash. He was right there. He's a candle flickering in the wind.
Wow.
Right there. And it's that, we talked about this during the photo shoot. It's that essence. It's tangible.
Right.
It's viscous. And you can feel it in the air. It's like a clicking and a snapping and a sparkly, and there's, I can taste it almost right now as we talk about it.
Absolutely.
And that's there with death and birth.
Yes.
And in this case, he was right on the line.
Oh,
and I was really feeling that. There's this thing called the APGAR score, and it's a rating of a baby's health. It goes from 0 to 10. 0 is there's no heartbeat, there's no breath, there's nothing. 10 is perfect health. At 1 minute out of the womb, he was a 1.
Oh my gosh.
At 5 minutes out, he was a 9.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And he's been an 11 since then.
And he's doing well. And I've seen pictures of him. He's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I usually wrap up these podcasts by going, my book is about glimpses and seeing little glimpses of God. I think you just kind of defined the ultimate glimpse at the birth of your son. You experienced that. I'm in awe. I'm almost speechless, Tom. I think we'll wrap it up here because I don't know how you top that story. God bless you. Thank you for coming on this podcast. I appreciate it. And for those of you who are listening as you go about your day, I encourage you to take the time, look around, and catch a glimpse.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of the Glimpses YouTube family. I hope you like, subscribe, and enjoy all of the clips and episodes coming your way. As you go about your day, I encourage you all to take a moment, look around, and catch a glimpse.